To our apostolic family, we thank you. To the pastor of our church, Dr. Brazier, we thank the Brazier family. There are some people in this world who simply cannot be introduced. These are the people who are so groundbreaking and remarkably relevant that they exist at the level of our collective consciousness. Some folks are not just popular, they are significant. And whenever you come across people like that, they need not be introduced, only presented. We don't need anybody to introduce us to Vice President Kamala Harris. She has always been a part of our community, from graduating from Howard University to a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, just down the block from here. She has always been a part of the ethos and the grandeur of Black life. Her heritage stands across the roads of two communities, and she has dared to make each of them proud. Not only do we know her, but the people who don't like us know the name Vice President Kamala Harris. People who are mired in bigotry and hatred have come to know the name of Vice President Kamala Harris. People who make threats against democracy and have no compassion for the least of these have certainly found out who this remarkable woman happens to be. And every time she wakes up in the morning, I'm sure there are some adversaries of our cause and our culture and against America who say, man, she is at it again. She won't stop. Because she is a woman who has stood up for women's rights, for what we know should be a constitutional right, for a woman to have the right to make decisions on the autonomy of her body. Here is a woman who does not dissimulate, but says what she means, and she means what she says. I want you to understand that we are in the presence of someone who is not only the Attorney General for the state of California, not only a former United States Senator, and not only the Vice President of the United States of America, but she is probably, perhaps more importantly, a Proverbs 31st chapter woman. That is to say, she is a woman of tremendous character, someone that brings good and no harm. She works not only to provide for her family, but for millions of families of those that don't have lobbyists and special interests that walk the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. She is our advocate. Vice President Harris sets about her work vigorously, and her light does not go out at night because she even shines in the dark. Even when entire segments of the American population resents the fact that a woman of color is one heartbeat away from being the most powerful person on earth, she continues to shine. Do you know how fearless and committed you have to be to walk into places every day where you know people don't think you deserve to be there, and yet you shine every day? Do you have any idea how much faith and how much dignity you have to have when people say, we would like to turn back the hands of time to when blacks and browns did not have the rights that we have today? They want us to ask permission for us to be who we naturally are and enjoy all of the fruits of American citizenship. And Vice President Harris, I want to personally thank you for standing in the way of these tyrants. I see them every day in Washington. I want to personally thank Vice President Harris for casting the most tie-breaking votes in the history of any vice president, fulfilling the role of the President of the United States Senate. And by the way, that hasn't happened since 1832, 191 years ago. 31 times you've said no to policies and legislation that would undermine the promise of America for all people. 31 times you stood in the way of those tyrants who thought about the rich and only wanted to serve the interests of those who have already been well served. 31 remarkable times you stood up for what this nation might be, and in doing so, you are now in the shadows of the Reverend Martin Luther King. 31 times you stood up for American working families. 31 times you stood up to fight for what has been right. 31 times you stood up to say yes to freedom, yes to equality, yes to the dignity of men and women. 31 times you've done it, and I thank you, Vice President Kamala Harris. What she has done in the Senate is a manifestation of what Reverend Martin Luther King died to do in the streets. And somebody needs to thank the Vice President of the United States for having stood in the breach and defended our interests. Madam Vice President, with your permission, might I have a point of personal privilege? I just learned that. This week, my father announced his retirement. Now he has pivoted. He can't retire. He's a pastor and he's a freedom fighter. Give the Reverend Jesse Jackson another loving round of applause. I do fundamentally believe, Dad, that the nation owes you a debt of gratitude for how you've continued to do the work of your mentor, the Reverend Martin Luther King, and almost single-handedly changed the content, the tone, and the direction of the Democratic Party. President Barack Obama, Vice President Kamala Harris, and almost every other Black elected official, most of all, me, would not be here without you for what you did in 1984 and 1988. You changed public policy in America, and all you had, all Dad had, was a Bible. You helped to create the kind of America that would allow your middle son to represent the 1st Congressional District of Illinois. I would not be here without you, Mom and Dad. I gotta wrap it up now. I could think all day long. Rainbow Push is a civil rights organization, Reverend Haynes, but everybody can't march in the streets. If America is to be the nation we want it to be, we need people sitting at the table when the policies are being crafted and haven't forgotten who they are. Marching in the streets without somebody sitting at the table defeats the purpose of marching in the first place. Reverend Martin Luther King told us to agitate and then negotiate, and then to deliver tangible outcomes for the people that we are serving who live under the iron hills of oppression. I say to all of my young activists, friends, let the marchers march. That's our tradition. And let the protesters protest. That is our tradition. But don't you ever underestimate the value and the importance of the people we send to the table. These are the people who deliver on the social and political climate that you have helped to create. And I don't care what anybody says about the Biden-Harris administration. I've seen it up close and personal on your behalf. They have already delivered for the American people. In the last administration prior to the Biden-Harris administration, we were promised an infrastructure bill every week after week after week, and not one shovel went in the ground. The Biden-Harris passed the legislation for infrastructure. That's what they've already done. And let me tell you, work is now plentiful. This administration has passed laws to combat climate change. There are more people working in this country today than has ever been in the history of America. This administration rescued our economy that was mishandled by the previous administration. This administration expanded the benefits and services to veterans in a way that has never, ever been done before. The Biden-Harris administration passed meaningful gun law reform the first time in 30 years. They protected LGBTQ rights. We have to continue to fight. They put the first African-American woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, on the United States Supreme Court. This administration has delivered. And through the American Rescue Act, this administration has provided support to millions of people who would have otherwise drowned in the sea of economic inequality. On behalf of all of us, Vice President Harris, thank you for being in the room where it happens. And we thank you for not being one of those members of our community who gets to where they are and then forgets how they got there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am not here to introduce her. I am merely here to present to you the Vice President of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Vice President Kamala Harris.
Good afternoon. Please have a seat. I said to the congressman, I didn't know he could preach like that. Oh, good afternoon, everyone.